Today we got something super special for you guys. We got 6 tips that you're probably not going to find many other places. I don't see any other backpacking YouTubers talking about this kind of stuff. And these are just tips and tricks that I use on almost all my backpacking trips that make my life that much better out on trail. And to start things out, we're going to talk about some of the new ultralight backpacking gear that I've picked up in 2023. And somewhat of a controversial item that people seem to have ripped me for quite a few times is my Dyneema pot sack from Pond's Edge. Now, part of the reason I went with the Dyneema stuff sack for my pot is to save a little bit of weight out of my gear loadout. But another reason, and a reason I specifically went with a white stuff sack for my pot, when you take your white Dyneema stuff sack, say for your pot like I've got here, and you combine it with your headlamp, you throw your headlamp inside, seal that guy up, and it makes a nice little diffuser for your light. Really nice to have when you're inside your shelter at night. Instead of getting that really bright direct beam like you usually get from your headlamp, this diffuses it and it's just going to illuminate the area. It's just one of those nice little things to have, and I think it often gets overlooked. If you're going to get any kind of Dyneema stuff sacks, make sure you would get yourself at least one white one for the light diffuser effect. You will not regret it. A piece of gear I suggest to people all the time is getting yourself a pack liner instead of using individual dry bags throughout your gear loadout. If you're confused on the concept of a pack liner, basically I take this contractor grade garbage bag and I put this inside my backpack, and anything I want to keep dry goes inside this garbage bag. And like I said, I eliminate any dry bags out of my kit, and this is how I keep all my gear dry. Now, the pack liner can serve multiple purposes. This can actually really come in handy for you when you're sleeping in your tent at night. If you've ever slept in a single wall shelter and you've noticed that your feet or any part of your lower body is gonna rub up against the tent wall and you're gonna get a little bit of condensation on your quilt or your sleeping bag, one thing you can do is you can take your pack liner, take it out of your bag at night, open it up and slide the foot box of your quilt or your sleeping bag inside the pack liner. That way, if it rubs up against the tent walls, your pack liner is going to get wet and it's going to keep your quilt or your sleeping bag dry at night. It's also going to help seal in a little bit of extra heat. So if you're finding that your feet are a little bit chilly at night, in a pinch, you can stuff it inside your pack liner and get yourself a little bit of boost to get yourself through those cold nights. Third up on our list has to do with water crossings. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply to every single water crossing because some water crossings are just inherently very, very simple. But if we come to a tricky water crossing, something that's gonna be, you know, like thigh to waist deep, the water is moving pretty good, it is always a really good idea before we tackle that water crossing to undo the chest strap of our backpack, undo the waist belt on our backpack, and loosen up the shoulder straps. The reasoning behind this is, say we end up falling in the middle of this water crossing. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but you know, things do happen when we're out there in the backcountry. The last thing you want when you fall on a water crossing is for the weight of your backpack to pull you down. So having your straps loosened up, having the chest strap undone, having the waist belt strap undone on your backpack, that's going to give you the ability to quickly ditch your backpack, and it's going to help you self-rescue a lot easier if you do happen to fall during a tricky water crossing. Tip number 4 has to do with cleanliness when we're out on a backpacking trip. And we're not necessarily talking about keeping a clean camp, we're actually talking about keeping ourselves clean. Now, every night before I go to bed, I make sure I give myself a rinse. I carry wet wipes with me, and I allocate 1 wet wipe per day on every backpacking trip I go on. And I just use that wet wipe to just give myself a quick wipe down before I go to bed. This helps get any oils and grease and any kind of chemicals, like if I've been using bug spray, just helps get that little bit of that stuff off my skin and helps keep my sleeping bag or my quilt that much cleaner when I crawl into bed at night. Now, if you don't feel like carrying wet wipes or any kind of soap or, you know, anything to clean yourself up, just using water and a pack towel is going to be significantly better than just crawling into your bed without wiping any of that stuff off. And it's going to limit the amount of times you're going to have to wash your quilt or sleeping bag going forward. The less times you're going to have to wash that gear, the longer it's going to last. Now for tip number 5, this is kind of something I've talked about multiple times in the past, and that's setting your gear up and testing out new gear before you take it out on trail. Now, this is very important, especially with tents and shelters, especially when you get into trekking pole tents. From experience, if you've never set up a trekking pole tent before, they can be a little bit tricky to pitch. And just getting that setup mastered when you're at home before you get out on trail can really help you out. But taking this even a step further, a lot of modern tents now do require some form of seam sealing. So setting up your tent and making sure you check over all of the seams on your shelter can really help you out in the end. It would be a really, really crappy situation to find yourself in out on trail trail, say your tent doesn't necessarily have all of the seams properly sealed, and you didn't notice it at home because you didn't set your tent up, and now you're out on trail getting rained on and you've got water dripping inside your tent, that is a very, very crappy situation. And this tip is very relevant for me because I actually just had a new tent show up this morning. It is set up right over there, and I actually just did the seam seal on it right before I filmed this video because I do plan on taking that tent out with me on trail in a couple weeks. Not necessarily for me to use, but one of my friends is going to be using this tent. So I made sure that I set this tent up, made sure it had all the parts for it, and I made sure I seam sealed it. Just a smart thing to do when you get new gear before you take it out on trail. And number 6, I've probably talked about this one in the past before, but I don't think it gets talked about enough. And that is when you get home from a trip, one of the very first things you should do is get all of your gear out of your bag, get it uncompressed, get it out of the stuff sacks, and let it air out. It's really, really easy when we get home from a backpacking trip to just take all of our gear, toss it in the gear room, toss it into the basement, toss it in the garage, wherever it is we put our gear, and just think, oh, I'll just leave it and forget about it until the next trip. This can really come back to bite you if you have any kind of condensation in your gear at all. Mold and mildew can wreak havoc on backpacking quilts and expensive down gear, as well as tents and any kind of shelter system. And it really doesn't take that long when you get home. You know, if you've got a spare room in your house, just take all that gear, get it set up, get it opened up. If it's nice outside, take all that gear, let it air out in your backyard. This is one of those things that's really going to promote longevity in our gear, and it's going to help our backpacking gear last for years. For tip number 7, we're going to talk some ultralight backpacking gear a little bit. Now, I have upgraded a lot of my backpacking gear in 2023 to some custom ultralight backpacking gear, and I've shot a bunch of different videos on it. So if you guys are looking for some ultralight backpacking gear ideas, check out either of these videos. I'm sure you'll enjoy some of the stuff you find in there. As always, guys, I am Matty. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one.